and I was conscious during the events.
Welcome to Eye to the Sky, the UFO Synopsis. Now here's your host, Andrew.
And welcome to Eye to the Sky, the UFO Synopsis, here on UFO Paranormal Radio Network, also broadcast live on UPRN 105.5 New Orleans. I'm your host, Andrew, and tonight my guest, Antonio. Oh, darn it, I'm sorry, I get tangle-tongued on this. Huneeus.
Huneeus, yeah.
Huneeus. Okay, my Spanish is not good at all. Antonio has covered the UFO field from an international perspective for over 30 years. His articles have appeared in dozens of publications in the U.S., Latin America, Europe, and Japan. He is also the co-author of the Lawrence Rockefeller-funded UFO briefing document, The Best Evidence Available. He edited the book, A Study Guide to UFOs, Psychic and Paranormal Phenomenon in the USSR. He has studied French at the Sorbonne University in Paris and journalism at the University of Chile in Santiago in the 1970s. He has lectured at dozens of UFO conferences all over the world and has been interviewed by many media outlets, including the Washington Post, the Sci-Fi and History channels, Nippon TV, and etc. He has received the Ufologist of the Year Award at the National UFO Conference in Miami Beach in 1990, and the Courage in Journalism Award at the X Conference in Gaithersburg, Maryland in 2007. Open Minds Production is hosting the 20th Annual International UFO Congress, which will be held at the Fort McDowell Resort and Casino in Fountain Hills, Arizona, from February 23rd through the 27th, 2011. Antonio is involved with the planning and preparations for the 2011 IUFOC, and I'm very pleased to welcome Antonio as my guest this evening. And Antonio, I apologize for getting tripped up on your name.
It happens, believe me. And it's not even a Spanish name, by the way. That's more like German or Dutch or something like that. But of course, I am originally from Chile. You know, my family is. So yes, I'm very, very happy to be on your show.
Oh, I appreciate that very, very much. You know, as we stated in the bio here, you have been involved for 30 years in ufology, and I have to admit, I am very, very impressed with a lot of your work because you've covered a lot of South America, and South America gets a lot of UFO activity, but you just don't hear about it that much here in the States.
That's correct, yeah. Of course, the UFO phenomenon, you know, it's totally global in nature, so it's reported everywhere in the world, really, not just South America, but China and Russia, Europe, Africa, Asia, literally everywhere. Even Antarctica, we've had cases in Antarctica. The only thing is it sometimes, you know, depending on the region of the world or the time period, you know, sometimes you don't hear. Let's say that during the Cold War, you know, stuff that was coming from behind the Iron Curtain, you know, it was a lot of censorship. It was difficult to get materials from the old Soviet Union. Of course, all that's changed. And then also the cultural views towards UFOs do change, you know, from a little bit from culture to culture, or country to country, but not so much the descriptions, though. It seems that what people are seeing in South America or in China is the same as what they're seeing here. So it's definitely an international phenomenon. But the thing is, and of course, the research for international cases has completely changed since the days I started in the 70s, where it was very hard to get a lot of information from abroad. unless you travel there physically, you know. Now with the internet, everything is instantaneous. I mean, if there's a report in Malaysia, you find out, you know, within hours. But there's still the problem of languages. So even with the web, you know, a lot of American researchers, I guess if you don't know foreign languages, you will miss a lot of information. And I do know some languages. I wish I knew more, because, I mean, I still have trouble with many languages that I don't know, but certainly the Spanish, the Latin languages, and I know French as well, so that gives me a whole window to a whole area of activity that normally people don't follow.
Oh, this is true. I've often wished I learned more than one language. You know, and one of the things that you've done too, because I read your most recent two-part article in Open Mind's website. Oh,
the one on Costa Rica?
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that you and Dr. Haynes revisited was the Cote Lake.
Correct. Yeah, very impressive photograph. Yeah, one of the most scientifically important photographs because of the conditions under which it was taken. You know, it was taken by special cameras that take pictures to do maps. In this case, it was from the Geographical Institute of Costa Rica, so it was a government plane. And in fact, I did meet one of the crew members at that conference that I went to, San Jose. This was in the mid-90s, and but they didn't see anything because they were just looking, you know, towards the windows of the plane, and the cameras. Right, the cameras were pointing downwards, obviously, because they were to take pictures, and it was a camera special for this purpose that took a picture every half a minute. So the plane was flying slowly, and click, you know, every 30 seconds a picture was being taken. So the people didn't see it, but then when the film was developed, that's when this very large object appeared right there over the lake. And it's a very unusual photograph. This is why Dr. Haynes and Dr. Jacques Vallée and all these scientists have been very excited with this picture, is because it's practically one of the very few pictures in which the UFO is taken from above. Normally it's the opposite, right? The person is in the ground and you see an object flying above you, and so you catch the underside of the UFO. But in this case it's the opposite. The plane was above the UFO. So that's very, very unusual. And what's important is that they obtained, I mean, all this thing took years, you know, but eventually when the picture emerged, thanks to these Vilches brothers that I mentioned in the article, the people from the Geographical Institute contact them because they were well-known established ufologists in Costa Rica, and so then they had it analyzed, and eventually it went to Dr. Haynes and Vallée. But then there was a dispute whether it could have been a water sprout or something on the, you know, some dirt on the negative or whatever. So they actually obtained on loan the original negative, and then that theory was ruled out. It was definitely the image was embedded in the picture itself.
And what I think is really interesting too, from an amateur photographer's point of view, is the size of the negative. It was an 8 by 8 inch negative.
Right. Yeah, in that picture that we posted, I don't think that's never been published, the whole picture. Actually, a little bit had to be cut too because it didn't fit in the scanner. But in not only that, the Vilches brothers gave me the two photographs that come before and after, so I have the complete sequence. I have, of course, those two don't show the object because the plane is moving. So, but I have the photo before frame 300, which was the one with the UFO, and then so that would be 299, and then I have frame 301. So because these pictures they're not put in a composite, right, to do maps. But what we discovered in that trip is that, of course, everybody knows about this picture. It was even on the cover of the famous Cometa report and put by a bunch of retired French generals and French officials, a very well-known report in ufology. They used it for their cover. That's how impressed they were. But what we discovered in that trip is that there were a lot of sightings in that area. And even though this picture is, like I said, from back in 71, But even the people we met there were many witnesses, so we were able to document some of those sightings. And then, as I saw it on the internet, there's still things being reported in that area where there's these two lakes. The big one is called Arenal, and then you have the smaller lake, Cote, which is not that small, by the way. When you're there in a boat, it's not that small, but it's not a huge lake. So definitely a very interesting case, yeah. And in terms of photographic evidence, one of the most impressive. So there is evidence everywhere, if you look for it, and that's one of the things that convinced me that this phenomenon, because I'm a science journalist, and initially I was skeptical, like many people are. I knew very little about the subject. I just assumed that because it wasn't being recognized officially, there wasn't much to it. But I was very ignorant about it. We're talking all the way back, right, into the early 70s. But once I start reading books by Hynek and even the Project Blue Book files, this is stuff that was newer at that time when I got involved. I realized that hey, wait a minute, there is a lot of evidence. It's just that most people are not aware of it.
Sadly, that's true. Just a quick back to this one object. Like I said, that photograph I had seen in I don't know how many books and over the internet over the years. But what surprises me is that because the altitude of the plane was known, and all this, they were able to determine the size of this thing, and it measured out at 210 meters or 683 feet.
Yep.
That's huge.
That's huge. Yeah, exactly. That was the other thing. Here you could estimate exactly the dimension of the object because you knew the altitude of the plane, you know the dimensions of the lake, and so you can just do the math and you come up with at least an approximate dimension. Where if you're taking a picture of an object above, it's very hard to estimate. Well, sometimes you can if the picture if it's moving and you have reference buildings or trees or something like that, then sometimes you are able to come up with an approximate, but not as ironclad as in this case.
Like I said, I'd seen that picture many times.
Oh yeah, it's a famous picture. It was published by Jacques Vallée in his book Confrontations. He has the research there, and of course there was the scientific analysis that was published by the Journal of Scientific Exploration that both Haynes and Vallée did. It's in the cover of the Cometa report, and that's a very well-known document in ufology. And I'm sure it's in many other books and magazines and websites. Yeah, but I have like a real good copy of the photo, and I have like the entire photo, not just the frame.
Wow.
So that was quite fascinating to be able to do that.
Well, that whole area of those two lakes is really a hotbed of sightings and activity.
Yeah, it is. It is. Like I said, when we went there, and we went to this place that was called the Echo Lodge, and the owner, which is all in the article, of course, in our website, openminds.tv, the owner himself was a witness, the chef, and so on, guests, and then we went closer to the Arenal Lake, which is very near, only about 20 minutes away, and we met a woman there that she had seen also, and so it is definitely a hotbed. And of course, there's many people have researched this factor of UFOs and bodies of water. There seems to be something about water that attracts UFOs. And there are many cases when they're seen in the oceans and coming off the water. Sometimes they're referred as USOs, right? Unidentified submarine object or unidentified sea object. The only reason you hear less is because obviously there's much less people in water and ships or whatever, so you get less reports. But nevertheless, there are quite a number by the time you put them all together, and not just the oceans, but of course lakes and rivers.
Yes, I've heard a lot of majority of sightings do take place near or over water.
Right, reservoirs. That's another area. There's a place in Argentina called Victoria, it's a city, and it's in a province that in Spanish is called Entre Rios, which literally means between rivers. And because it's a province that is between two big rivers cross that province, so there's a lot of marshes and things like that. And there's tremendous. So there's a mother and daughter team there. I wrote about this years ago when I was writing the UFO column for Fate magazine, and I met these people too. And although I didn't go to the area, but I met them at a conference in Chile. And they've documented, I don't know, hundreds of cases, and they got some very nice photographs, and all riding around the coast of these rivers.
Gosh, one thing I think is very admirable about Argentina right now is their UFO commission, their Air Force UFO commission.
Yeah, we're everybody's pretty excited about it because this is one of the subjects that I'm going to be covering, in my talk at the Congress. I'm the last speaker, as a matter of fact, at the UFO Congress. I'll be talking next Sunday, a week from tomorrow. And, I'm going to deal with many different stories that I covered for Open Minds magazine or the website, but certainly one of the stories that I'm going to be covering is what I call the new trend in South America, especially in the southern tip of South America, where now it seems that it's becoming good politics, which always used to be the opposite, for air forces, or in some cases for the civil aviation agencies in these countries, to create UFO agencies. This is a new phenomenon. In the old days, even though some of these countries did have some military cases, but they used to be secret, like usually is the case with military UFO reports. Then for a while there was nothing, and now it started with Uruguay, even though the Uruguay actually started years ago, since 1979. They have one of the oldest UFO agencies from the Air Force. And then the next one was Chile, and this was like almost 20 years later. That was created in 1997, but really took off in 1998. And I know the people well there. I've been Chilean. I've been there many times. In fact, the director of that committee called CEFA, he was one of the essayists in Leslie Kean's book. Yeah. And General Bermudez. And then he was kind of out of business for a little while. That commission was not totally closed, but it was not active. And then last year it was reactivated. And then the Peruvian Air Force created also a similar commission, and now Argentina was the one missing. And I think even though Argentina in the past had done had several projects, which I did cover in the Open Minds website too a while ago. I did a 2-part about all the military files, such as we have them, which are not. Most of them are missing, or they haven't been released. The only country in Latin America that has seriously declassified the UFO archives is Brazil. And, of course, we're going to have Jevaerd at the Congress. A.J. Jevaerd is a very well-known, the best-known ufologist from Brazil. He's the publisher of the UFO magazine there and runs a UFO group. A very, very active man. He's lectured at the International Congress before, when it used to be in Laughlin, and he's been in many symposiums in the U.S. and international. Very active man. And he was part of an effort which really produced results. Same thing like in Argentina. There was an effort to a request, where thousands of people signed for the military to release their files, and it worked. It's not like they've released everything, but at least they have released a substantial amount of documents. Not just documents, but even photographs and just whole case files.
Yes, and one thing I think Another thing I think very admirable for Argentina is most governments, they don't listen to what the people say. We want this, we want that. But in Argentina, they actually listened.
They did. I know. That was unusual. Yeah, we have the statement there by Commodore Tealdi, who's going to be the head of the new commission, where he said, they were getting apparently thousands of messages on the Air Force website and on the Ministry of Defense website, or people were calling or whatever. And that was definitely a factor. I think that was one big factor, and the other factor was that they were kind of, in Argentina is a country that they like to think of themselves as one of the sort of the superpowers in South America, and they were kind of behind the curve on this one, on the UFO department. So they reversed course and they created this agency. I don't think it's active as yet, but it was officially announced, so I'm sure we'll hear more about it.
I think it's very admirable of a government to listen to their people on something like this. It's very commendable. You have been involved in reporting all these cases from South America into the U.S. Which one has fascinated you the most?
Oh, well, there's so many, as a matter of fact, the first case that got me into ufology was a very bizarre case. One of these days I'm going to put it too on the website or in the magazine, although I published it many times, but this was in the past, and those articles are not posted online right now. It was known as the Corporal Valdez abduction. Maybe you've heard of this. It was a military patrol in northern Chile, right in the border, almost in the border with Bolivia. And this happened in 1977, on April 25th, 1977. And there was this military patrol, and but it was in the early hours of the day, when the sighting happened, around, let's say, 4 a.m. or something like that. So most of them were sleeping, but one of the soldiers was a guard, and he saw this huge object that was almost landing there near their patrol. So he woke up the rest of the patrol, and the corporal, who was the highest ranking guy in this patrol, there were 6-7 soldiers plus the corporal. He told them that they shouldn't move or anything, but then he disobeyed his own orders. As he explained later, he said like something took control of him, like something was urging inside his brain that he should walk towards this light. So he did, and it was at night, so it's not exactly clear that they saw him literally disappear, but they see their chief, walking towards the object, and then suddenly he's gone. And they're panicking. These are just conscripts, right? I mean, these are just guys doing the military service, 19-year-old kids, basically. And here they're confronting something totally unknown, and their leader is gone. And this goes on for about 20 minutes. And then suddenly they hear a voice, and the corporal is behind them. And this is strange because they never saw him walking past, between the object and where the patrol was. And he was kind of in a state of amnesia. Passed out, basically. But then here are the two things that are so strange about this case. One was that when the guy came back from his experience inside the UFO, he had a 5-day growth on his beard. And when you're in the military, you have to shave every day. So that was a very strange physiological effect. But then he had a wristwatch. And the wristwatch had stopped after the 20 minutes, but the date didn't show April 25th by April 30. So there was a mechanical effect on the watch that coincided with the growth of his beard. So it looked like he went into a different time-space continuum or whatever, and he was 5 days gone there, but in our time it was only 20 minutes. So it's a very, very strange case. And it was pretty much admitted by the military, by the army. Chile was a dictatorship at the time, and it was very tough dictatorship. General Pinochet, maybe you've heard of. And initially they censored the story. So the press was very censored in those days, but it was mostly on political things. You couldn't criticize the government and so on. But this was different, right? This was a UFO case, and there was almost like a media revolt, saying, oh, we're tired of being censored about everything else. I mean, we'll obey if it has to do with communism or whatever, the Cold War, but this is different. So enough pressure was put that actually the story was released. And a book was just published recently, as a matter of fact. I haven't read it yet, by a Chilean journalist and UFO researcher. I guess he tracked some of the members of the patrol and so on. And I mean, there's been some excerpts published online, but I haven't had the occasion to read the whole book. So that's definitely a fascinating case, and that was the very first case that I published journalistically. That was my introduction into ufology, a very unique and strange case. The other one that is fascinating, and this was published in a couple of issues ago in the Open Minds magazine, was a landing case that took place in Pirassununga in Brazil in February of 1969. This case is extraordinary because you have so many parameters and so many witnesses. I mean, first of all, it was a daytime observation. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning. According to the Brazilian Air Force files on this case, which have been released, maybe as many as 500 people saw the object. The object landed, and it left marks on the ground, which were photographed by the Air Force. The object seemed to have produced some kind of electromagnetic effect that there was a blackout in the town. The phone lines were out at the same time that the UFO incident was happening. So that's what we know in ufology as close encounter of the second kind, right? Second kind because you have the landing traces. Second kind also because you have the electromagnetic interference. And also there's a third phenomena. There was only one witness that got close to the object. It was a fruit vendor. It was a 19-year-old kid at the time called Tiago Machado. And he got very excited about this. Normally people would have been scared, but this guy had a different reaction, and he wanted to get close to the object. Instead of running away, he would run towards the object. As the UFO landed, and it was a classical flying saucer, a classical flying disc, a hatch opened, and these aliens, or occupants, or whatever we want to call them, levitated out of the object. And the guy was running towards it, and they shot him. Not badly, but they shot him with some kind of beam on his thigh. And so he fell to the ground and had to be taken to the hospital and everything. And he had like a minor burn, but it wasn't a serious injury. So some people say, well, maybe this was aggressive. But other people, in fact, it was an officer from the Brazilian Air Force, said, actually, maybe not. Maybe they actually did him a favor, because as he was running towards the object, and then when the object took off, maybe he would have been injured, by the propulsion field or whatever of the object. So maybe it was a way to just keep him away. So he was taken to the hospital, but like I said, it was, within an hour or whatever, he was fine. But the marks were there, and they were confirmed by the doctor, who was also interviewed by the Air Force. Besides, people saw this scene too. There were many witnesses who saw the whole thing, the fruit vendor running towards the object, being shot, falling to the ground. So it's an extraordinary case. The only thing we don't have is footage. Those days, it was not like now. People didn't have cell phones. They could take pictures easily and so on. So there are no pictures. But everything else we do have. We have landing traces. We have an Air Force investigation which concluded that basically this thing was unknown, and it was daytime, and it was a close encounter of the third kind as well, because people saw the occupants. So very, very impressive case. Very, very little known. It's not one of the famous cases, but I've always found it fascinating.
One area of South America that I've always been fascinated by is the Andes Mountains.
Right.
It's such a high, altitude mountains.
Yeah,
and
I lived there. When I was a kid, my family, they were diplomats, so they were stationed in Ecuador, and I lived in Quito, the capital of Ecuador. It's very high. It's about 2,500 meters high, one of the highest capitals in the world, and it's beautiful. And of course, there are many, many reports of UFO sightings as well throughout Peru and Bolivia, Ecuador, everywhere.
Now, that's what I was going to ask, is if there's a lot of sightings in the Andes Mountains. And
There are. Yeah, well, like I said, even in Peru, they did create an official agency. I had the opportunity of meeting Commander Chamorro, one of the director of that group. Ecuador, for some reason, doesn't have really UFO groups, so I guess there are probably many more sightings that are documented. They do appear in the media and the newspapers and so on, but there's no place, where people can report them. But Peru has a richer tradition, and they had UFO groups, and now they have a government agency. Well, Shirley MacLaine, the famous actress, in her book Out on a Limb. I don't know if you read it. It appeared years ago. Yeah, she devotes almost half the book there about her adventures in Peru, and she tells her a story where she goes to one little town high in the Andes. I forget the name. I read it years ago, and there was a sign. Remember that says UFO seen here or something like that?
Oh, you're right. I had forgot about that.
Right. So, yeah. I met and interviewed years ago a gentleman that lived in Cusco, the ancient capital of the Incas. His name is Ponce de Leon, and he gave a lecture in Queens, in New York. This is when I was living in New York, and in Spanish was his lecture. In fact, he's mentioned in Shirley MacLaine's book too, not on that one, but on the one that came after, called It's All in the Play, where she still addresses some of the UFO experiences in Peru, and he mentions this gentleman by name and everything. And it was a very interesting guy, a guy totally from that area, of Indian heritage and everything. And he gave a fascinating lecture at that one time, which I recorded it, and I published some of those reports years ago. And yeah, he had a lot of cases in this sacred valley of the Incas and around Cusco. There were cases with lakes too, of objects coming out of lakes. There was a case that he investigated of a truck driver who was driving between Cusco and Lima, and he had some kind of cancer. And he was, this case was even mentioned in a book by Preston Dennett, but he took it from my article originally, and he gave me credit, so I'm not complaining. And so this fellow had a bad cancer, and he was scheduled to go to surgery at a major hospital in Lima. And he's, let's say, next month, right? So he's driving, and first, if I remember the story, his tire blows. One tire blows, so he has to stop the truck, fix the tire. Then he goes another 10 minutes or so, and another tire blows, and he didn't have more tires, so I guess he was waiting for someone else to come or something. And then suddenly he sees this disc that just hovers right over the truck and throws like a big beam or something. And, that's that. Maybe he was taken aboard, abducted. We don't know for sure. But the strange thing is when he goes to the hospital for his appointment, or before the surgery, the pre-surgery appointment with the doctor, and they do the test, and the doctor said, "Well, what happened? You're totally cured."
Mm.
So, there are some cases. I mean, it's interesting because this physiological effect happens both ways. There are cases where people are injured, like the Cash Landrum case, the famous one in Texas in 1980. You probably heard of it.
Oh yes.
And there are others. In Brazil, there were a whole series of incidents where people got injured in the northern Amazon. But occasionally, you get the opposite. You get cases where people are healed.
I've even heard
we don't have an explanation. It may be that, I think that some of the cases where people got injured, it was not hostile, it was just an accident, someone got too close to the energy beam or whatever. Although not the ones in Brazil. Some of the ones in Brazil, and this was documented by the Brazilian Air Force, those cases did seem hostile. But then, in the cases where people get healed, it seems that this is not an accident where there's a purpose. They send a different beam of energy or whatever, and people do get healed. But it happens rarely.
I think one case that I find fascinating, and I can't remember, what country it was in, but it was this elderly man, toothless, and he had a sighting and had this bright light shine on him, and I don't remember whether it was the next morning or a few days later, he'd grown a whole new set of teeth even. Yeah,
you're right. I have heard that case, but I can't remember right now either where it happened. The problem may be in Dennett's book, because he wrote a whole book about this, cases of UFO healing. And then one of the earlier cases that was at one time was very famous, probably mostly forgotten now, unless you read some of the old books or magazines, and it was known as the Dr. X case. And this happened in France. It's in Valle's book, Confrontations. He deals with this issue too of the healing cases and the injury cases, just what I just talked. And this man had a bad injury during the war in Algeria, when Algeria was a colony of France. There was an independence war there, and it was a pretty bad scene in the late 50s.
Yeah.
And this man had been injured, and he had this bad scar, I think, around his stomach or something. And then I think this happened not just over one day, but I think it happened over several days, over a period of weeks, where this flying disc was flying. Now he was retired from the war. This had happened years ago, and he lived somewhere in France and in the country. And there was this beam. He was engulfed in this beam of light or energy, and his injury from that war of Algeria was healed, and it was documented with photographs and everything. That's one of the earlier cases of physiological change, healing. So, but I have heard the one on the teeth. I forgot where it is. I think it's maybe somewhere in South America too.
I think so too. I'd have to go through all my books and find it again to remember. One thing that really fascinates me is, there's a lot of pre-Columbian Indian ruins all over the place, but you don't hear much about sightings around some of these sites.
Well, there are some. I have one that I know personally, not that I saw the object, but years ago, and I'm probably going to be posting this article soon in our Open Minds website. My sister was stationed with the UN at the time. She was working with the UN, and they had a mission in Guatemala for human rights. This was after the Guatemalan Civil War and all that strife had gone on, in the 80s. This was in the 90s. And so I went to visit her, and I documented also some UFO cases. But then I wanted to see some of the Maya ruins, and one of the more spectacular one is Tikal, which is in northern Guatemala, near Yucatan. And this is the one that appears in the movie Star Wars. You remember the very end of Star Wars?
Oh, yes.
When they reach the rebel base, and there's pyramids and you see the pyramids coming, then you see the canopy of the jungle.
Yes.
That's one reason why these ruins are so famous. And so I flew there. I was in Guatemala City, of course, and you go for the day. You take because it's a short flight, Guatemala, Central America, they're small countries. We took like a 6 a.m. flight to the northern, the province of El Petén, it's called. And then you drive about an hour or so to this area where the Maya ruins are, and it's a huge. This was a very, very large complex, city. And now my guide was a Guatemalan researcher, ufologist, very well known in Guatemala. He has a radio program. I remember he interviewed me. Right now the name eludes me. So he, of course, he had been many times in Tikal, but he was very happy to take me as, to be my tour guide, so-called. So we go there and we visited the ruins and had a wonderful time and took some pictures and all that. And then we were having lunch at one of the restaurants there in the tourist area where you buy the postcards and all that. And because this guy was well known in Guatemala, he had appeared on TV shows talking about UFOs, and he had his own radio program and so on. Two guys recognized him. Said, "Oh, engineer, they call them always in Central America. They call you doctor, engineer, even if you're not." And he said, "You were the person we wanted to see because we had a UFO sighting." And sure enough, we got a report right there. So and these people were taking pictures for postcards.
Oh,
they
my.
They had the contract, I guess, with the facilities, to take pictures for postcards of the pyramids and sunrise or whatever. And so there they were with their pictures, with the cameras and everything. And I don't think they took a picture of it. Maybe they didn't have the camera, so they hadn't loaded the cameras or whatever. But they said they saw these balls of light. And so that was there's one case where in this major archaeological facility, we got this report from people who seem totally credible. There is also a picture that I saw years ago that I have in my files of Machu Picchu, the famous Inca city, and this was taken by a doctor who was on vacation there, and he took a picture of him and his wife, or he must have had someone else take the picture because he shows the pictures, him and his wife, and they're standing there, and you see the ruins on the background. It's a nice picture. But then, and I guess they didn't notice it either because they were focusing on taking the picture of themselves and the ruins. But then when the picture was developed, there was a flying disc right above Machu Picchu. So there definitely are some reports. But to answer your question, I think also what happens is that a lot of these cases where the ruins are areas where there's still Indians live there basically. In Peru there would be Quechua Indians, or in Bolivia would be Aymara Indians. Central America there would be other types of Indians. And they're not going to tell you. It's the same thing when we get reports here in Indian reservations or something, unless you develop some kind of relationship with them. So they probably know themselves of many other cases, but they're not particularly talking about it to the white man.
I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. That it's part of their culture.
Yeah, it's part of their lore, right? It's part of their folklore or whatever. And they probably would talk if you make the effort and get to know them and all that, but they wouldn't be running and calling a radio station or something like that, like other people would if they live near a city or something.
Yeah, that's understandable. Gosh, is there any area in South America that just seems to be a magnet for these things?
Well, the areas, the flat areas, they vary too over a period of time, so you can have areas that are very busy at one time, like we used to have Gulf Breeze in Florida, but now you don't hear much about Gulf Breeze, or the Hudson Valley in New York, sometimes they're cyclical. You hear them for a while, then they quiet down, but then 20 years later, there's another wave. Belgium, remember the Belgium wave? I wrote an article about two for Open Minds, and in the past I covered it quite a bit because I was there once too, and I went to the Belgium UFO Society, SOBEPS, and I researched that when I worked on that Rockefeller report, the UFO briefing document, and that was one of our hot cases that at that time that was much new. But these days you don't hear much about Belgium. So this is not set in stone too. It varies. But yeah, some of the areas that we mentioned before, earlier in this conversation, the one around the lakes in Costa Rica, the one in Entre Rios province around the city of Victoria in Argentina, the area in northern Chile too, where there was that case of the Corporal Valdez, that area towards the interior of the province of Arica, well, the city of Arica. The province is called Tarapacá. That's hot area. There's been a lot of cases there, and so is the southern tip of Chile, Punta Arenas. They've had a lot of interesting cases there. So there are a number of areas.
I have a question from our virtual auditorium. This comes from Eternal Being, and he asks, have you come across any of the indigenous peoples of the areas with their tales or ceremonies that might indicate some connection to UFO activity?
Well, in research, I guess I have, not face to face, but in general, the indigenous people, whether it's in Latin America or in the U.S. or just about anywhere in the world, they don't seem to have the same cultural problems that they have with this phenomenon. For them, this is something they've dealt with before, or it's part of their mythology or their folklore. That seems to be the case. Recently, I went to a lecture in Tucson with Cliff Mahuti. It's a Zuni elder. You might have heard his name.
I think I have, yes.
Right, and he was precisely talking about all this, how they know about all this stuff. For them, this is nothing new. As far as specific ceremonies, I can't think of it right now, but I'm sure there's some stuff that will connect if I look into my files and so on. Because I did do some research on these things. And I saw some of the objects myself. There's the famous, this was even the symbol of what used to be called the Asian Astronaut Society. Remember Von Daniken and those people? And it looked like a little golden airplane.
Oh, yes.
I actually saw, I saw the originals. They're at the Gold Museum in Bogota, Colombia. They're in the vault of the Bank of the Republic, because they're worth millions. I mean, it's all made of gold. So it's not just archaeological, but it's also the weight in gold, right? So, and it's very dramatic. If you ever get a chance to go there, definitely don't miss it. It's an archaeological museum, but only of gold objects, and it's kept in the vaults of the Central Bank of the Republic is called there. And you take an elevator and you go down, and then you walk into the museum, and everything is dark. It's part of the drama, And then as the public walks in, you have to go there like on a guided tour. And then suddenly the lights start coming, and then you see all this. You're surrounded by all these golden objects. And among those, there are these, what the museum calls, for lack of a better term, zoomorphical figurines or something like that. But some of them really do look like airplanes. They're quite strange.
I have a replica of one of those.
You have a replica, right? Yeah.
Yes, I was fascinated by those ever since I saw them, early 70s in a book.
Right, they were very popular in the 70s. That's when they were publicized, I guess, by the Asian astronauts and Von Daniken. Yeah, well, like I said, I got to see the originals. They're quite small, but they're quite interesting.
Another question here from a virtual auditorium. This one's from Gossamer, and he would like to know, have there been any sightings in South America that would be considered a mass sighting because so many people witnessed the event?
Yeah, there was one case in Chile, in which I wrote about it years ago, when was it, in 1985, and it was a daytime sighting in Santiago, the capital, and it was estimated that maybe as many as 2 million people saw it. And now, it wasn't as spectacular as, let's say, the Phoenix lights. There were basically two objects on the sky, but it was daytime. One of the objects was later identified by the civil aeronautics people as a French weather balloon, and probably that's what it was, because even if you look at the images, it was also filmed, though, by the national TV network, but the other one remained unidentified. And according to reports at the time, it might have seen by as many as 2 million people, because they were there for quite a while. So it gave a chance, I guess people call, their mother or whatever, saying, "Hey, come see this object," and it completely revived the whole UFO issue. I wasn't there, unfortunately, because I was already living at that time I was living in New York, but I had my parents were still alive, and I was going quite often to Chile back in those days, and I gave a lecture about maybe 3-4 months after this incident, whereas I had given lectures couple of years earlier, and they were relatively small, and they were not picked up by the press or anything. When I gave the lecture after this UFO incident, it was bedlam, I mean, I had hundreds of people that came to the theater. I was in all the newspapers, and I was interviewed in TV and radio and everything, because, this incident had brought the whole UFO issue back into the front burner, and everybody seemed very interested. So that's one case. Of course, we've had the ones in Mexico, which are very well known. The one, during the eclipse and all that wave that took place in Mexico City in the early 90s, and those were seen, I think, by quite a number of people too. I don't know if each incident was seen by massive amount of people, but certainly overall they were seen by hundreds of people. And I'm sure there are other cases right now that I don't remember at the moment. But yes, it does happen occasionally. It doesn't happen often, though. I mean, look at even in the United States. I mean, we have the Phoenix lights. That's about the only one that I can think of a truly massive urban sighting, right? I mean, sometimes you do see sightings over big cities, but they're very fast, and so not too many people have a chance to see them.
We have about 2 minutes before we go to break. I'd like to give the website for where people can read your online articles.
Yeah, well, they can go to the openminds.tv, and basically that's where they'll well, we have, of course, lots of things on the web, so not only my articles, but if they go to my articles, once you're in openminds.tv, then you can either look at the current articles, or you can go directly. If you just put on the search, let's say my name, then it would take you to so openminds.tv, then Antonio, then it will take you to all the articles I've written. And
so that too.
Yeah, thanks. And I like to think so. And then, of course, there's the articles that I've written for the magazine. Some of the best stories are for the magazine, but those are not on the website because we want people to buy the magazine. So, but I got some good ones that I did for the magazine, and some very interesting subjects like the Vatican and other things.
And also a quick web address for the
for the Congress. Yeah. Well, if you go again to Open Minds, you can go directly. Or else you go to www.ufocongress.com. That's very easy, ufocongress.com. And once you get to that website, basically it has all the information that you need. It has the schedule, the prices, the location where in Fort McDowell, the resort and casino, everything that you need to know. It's in the website. But the link is in Open Minds. But then from Open Minds, you can go, or if you're in the Open Minds one, then what you do is you go where it says events. You press events on the menu, on top, and then that will take you directly to the UFO Congress, or you can go directly by just typing ufocongress.com.
And also, if you go to my website, i2thesky.net, that's i2thesky.net, there is a banner link there that will take you right to Open Minds website as well.
Right. Probably even it probably even goes directly to my page, right, where they list all the articles. Oh.
And on that note, we need to go to a break, and we'll be back here in 8 to 9 minutes with Antonio and myself here on Eye to the Sky, the UFO Synopsis on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Welcome to Eye to the Sky, the UFO Synopsis. Now here's your host, DeAndrew.
And welcome back to Eye to the Sky, the UFO Synopsis, here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, also broadcast live on UPRN 105.5 New Orleans. I'm your host, and tonight my guest is Antonio Huneeus. Did I get it right that time?
Yep, this time you did.
Yes. I hate mispronouncing people's names. I just feel so stupid for not being able to sometimes. You're speaking at this year's International UFO Congress here in Fountain Hills. You're the last speaker, aren't you?
I am the last speaker, correct. Yeah, because I'm the in-house, I'm with Open Minds. In case something happens, let's hope it doesn't, but you never know. The weather prevented some speaker from flying. It's going to be a day late, something like that. Then I have to be prepared. They may switch my lecture if there is a problem. But if everything goes according to plan, then I'm basically the closing speaker. I'm the last speaker, yes. And for me, it's quite exciting because I spoke at the very first International UFO Congress, the one that long before he moved to Laughlin, the one that the late Colonel Wendell Stevens started in Tucson.
Oh.
Yeah, that was back in 1991, and so I spoke in that one. And now, but of course at that time I was living on the East Coast, and now I'm speaking again 20 years later. And now I'm an Arizona resident, so things change.
Oh, it's beautiful down here. I'm loving it too. I lived in the Pacific Northwest for more years than I care to admit to.
Oh yeah, I cannot even understand how I suffered all those winters, like for decades. It's like I guess when you live there, even though there's the Caribbean and other places, but that's where you're living in New York or Washington or whatever. But I wouldn't change. No, I don't plan to move back east. No, unless it was some extraordinary contract, job offer or something like that. But besides, I got such a good job now with Open Minds. That would almost be impossible. For me, being a UFO researcher, but also a journalist, to be working full time on what I want to do instead of just as a hobby, right? Like most people are confronted with that problem, they have to make a living, pay rent, whatever, and then on their spare time they do UFOs.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
Right, but in our case, not just me, but Alejandro Rojas and Michael Schratt, all our team here, that's what we get paid for, to do UFOs full time. So it's great. I waited a whole life for this, I had some interesting projects before, like the UFO briefing document thing, sponsored by Rockefeller. I did work in Japan, but none of those were full-time jobs. They were interesting projects, and some of them were well paid and everything, but they would last, whatever, half a year, something, and then the project was over and you were back on your own. And in my case, in those days, being freelance, it was tough sometimes to make the, to gather enough resources, in order to not just to live, but also have resources to pursue this subject, which sometimes is not cheap. You have to travel, you need equipment, and so on.
Well, I'm very pleased though that Open Minds did take over the Congress and brought it to this area. It's wonderful. I don't have to do a long trip. I don't have to go fly anywhere. Just drive to the other side of town.
Yeah, no, it's great. Besides, and we have a really great lineup. I think, not just because I'm working for them, but I mean, we really have a very impressive lineup.
I agree.
We have 3 witnesses of Ben Waters' incident, including Colonel Holt, who was, of course, the deputy base commander, and we have a former Minister of Defense of Canada, of a NATO country, Paul Hellyer, and of course we got Nick Pope, who was the man running the UFO desk at the Ministry of Defense back in the 90s, a very well-known international ufologist. And Leslie Keane, that wrote that extraordinary book, about all the generals and officials from around the world.
Great book.
Yeah, it's a great book. She will be there. And Carol Roslin, who worked with Werner von Braun, who you don't normally get to see her very often.
This is true. I was surprised that she even came back to the States.
Right. And then many others, who are well-known authors or researchers, like Richard Dolan and Jim Mars and Stan Friedman, Travis Walton. We got a great lineup, and we're expecting a lot of people. There's already all the hotels in the area are all booked, but of course that's not a problem for any of the locals here. They don't have to stay in the bed. For the out-of-towners, it's already a problem. You cannot find a hotel in that Fort McDowell area. They're all booked, so they're going to have to stay in Phoenix somewhere and drive.
Yes, and I haven't been out to Fort McDowell Casino, so this is going to be an adventure for me.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place, and it's interesting that it's on an Indian reservation. So it's, and in fact, the first speaker will be talking about American Indian lore, sky lore. That's our very first speaker right now. I forgot his name. I have to look.
I'm trying to find it on my list too.
Yeah, I got.
A Rainbow Eagle.
Rainbow Eagle. Yeah, he was a friend of Alejandro Rojas, who I guess he's coming from Colorado or New Mexico, and
that's a speaker that I would like to listen to. I'd like to learn more about the natives of the area.
So that would be interesting. We have Dr. John Alexander, who is a controversial figure, because he was with the military for a long time, and then he worked for the Bigelow organization, and he just published a book called UFO Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities, and so he'll be talking about his book. Bob Dean, who's very well known in ufology. Lloyd Pyle, with the famous case of the Star Child skull.
Yes, I have seen that. Is he going to be able to bring it with him?
Oh yeah, he always brings it with him. I saw that. I'm assuming. I hope so.
I'm hoping so.
But I met him years ago when I was lecturing at the Ozarks conference, and this is when he first came across this skull. So I had a chance to see it and photographed it and all that. And at that time, very few people knew about it. Who else we have? Of course, Michael Stratt, who works with us. He's the expert on all the secret military projects, Area 51. He writes that column in the magazine called Unacknowledged Aviation. He's our aerospace expert, basically. Stan Romanek. That piece of Colorado, very, very, very well known. Kathleen Martin, the niece of Betty Hill, who wrote the book with Stanton Friedman. George Filer, who's is an old friend of mine. As a matter of fact, he lives in New Jersey, and when I was in New York, which most of my UFO career was in New York, yeah, I used to see him often. Very nice man.
That's another person I'd like to hear speak.
Yeah, and he's he puts the Filer Files, that weekly digest of all the UFO cases. Dolan we mentioned, which he seems to be everywhere. Every single UFO conference you see, they got Dolan. David Sarita, who's also an expert on propulsion. He's friends with Dan Aykroyd,
Yes. They did the Dan Aykroyd Unplugged.
Correct. The attorney, Daniel Sheehan, who worked with the late John Mack. He always used to come to the Congress when he was in Laughlin. And Nancy Talbot, who did a lot of the scientific research on the crop circles. Of course, Linda Howe, who's very, very well known, the TV journalist who documented the cattle mutilations way back in the late 70s. And she will be appearing with two of the Ben Waters or Rendlesham Forest witnesses, James Peniston and John Boros. These were the guys who went out on the first night, who were on that patrol on the first night, not the second night when Colonel Hall was with the tape and all that. The first night was, but this is when the UFO landed, and Peniston even touched it. He was in that panel that James Fox did a while ago at the National Press Club.
Yes.
So that ought to be quite fascinating. Jim Mars, very well-known author. Stan Friedman, of course, famous in our field. The nuclear physicist too. Oh yeah, he's sort of
Friedman is the godfather of ufology.
Yeah, he's the dean. He's the dean of ufology now. Used to be Heineck, but that was way back.
Yes.
Well, Leslie Kane, we mentioned Colonel Holt, we mentioned Don Schmidt, the best known of the Roswell researchers, together with Friedman.
Well.
And more in the local Phoenix area, Frances Barwood, the councilwoman who tried to investigate the Phoenix lights.
One thing a lot of people don't really mention concerning the IUFOC, it's all everybody talking about the speakers, but also there's the Edie Awards, and the documentaries that are up for these awards will be shown. Yeah, good that you brought that. Yeah, there's going to be many other things as well.
We're going through the list of speakers right now, but yes, there is the EB Award, which, for those who are not familiar, basically filmmakers and people who did documentaries, can even be a feature film, can even be fiction if it's related to aliens. They submit these films, and then they get seen earlier on, and then finally the final films, and they will be shown to everybody, and then there are of course awards, for the best feature film and the best short film and so on. So it's a chance for people to see a lot of documentaries, many of which you won't see on TV. These are documentaries that people produce, but as you know, it's very hard to sell to networks. So many of these films will never appear even on networks, but some of them are quite good. So that's one thing. We're going to have also sky watches. One of the things that we have here in Open Minds, we have some very good cameras with night vision and telescopes and all these kinds of very expensive equipment. And so we'll be bringing that. And of course, in Fort McDowell, it's outside of the city, so the skies are very clear. And so yeah, there are a lot of. There is also for abductees, Barbara Lamb, who's a very well-known psychotherapist that specializes in abductions. She'll be running like a experiencer interaction for people who want to go to that, and then we have social events, a banquet, and so on. So it's a full program. It's going to be very busy between Wednesday and Sunday. And Wednesday evening is the Meet the Speakers cocktail party? Yeah, I believe so. I'm looking at the program here. Let's see. Here's a list of speakers. No, I think it's in this other brochure. I have it here. I got so many papers in my desk that I'm... but there's definitely a speakers, meet the speakers thing, yes.
And those are always fun because everybody's so relaxed, and you can go right up to any of the speakers and talk with them, and that's the best part, is getting
right. Yeah, it's right here. You're mingling. Right. It's on Wednesday between 7 and 10:30 p.m. Meet the speakers, and then at 10:30 you have the film festival screenings. So that's every evening there will be the screenings, so people can go and see that. Then on Friday, again at 7:15. That's up to past midnight, 12:30 a.m. You have the Sky Watch, and we'll have a local guy here too, Jeff Willis. He's speaking there too, and he's the one. I don't know if you saw that, was on that new series, and I believe those people are going to be there too at our Congress. What is it called? Fact or Fake? It's in the Sci-Fi Channel.
Yes.
Yeah, and they were analyzing the video by Jeff, which is somewhere outside of Phoenix, in the desert, and they went there and then they filmed themselves. It was on their first episode, I believe. So they got some footage with their own cameras.
Actually, I saw that.
It was their premiere. It was their first episode. So Jeff will be there, and he will be kind of leading the Skywatch because he does that a lot. He's got tons of footage. So it's going to be packed with activity. I'm very excited. I think it's going to be a great Congress. And of course, for anybody that's local here, it's easy. They don't even have to go to the whole thing. They can go for one day or even half a day. We have different price packages, so. You can just do half a session or whatever.
Or you can do it by the speaker?
I'm not sure. No, I don't think you can do by speakers. I think you have to do like half a day. So in other words, yeah. At some conferences they do it just by one speaker, but I believe that we don't have that package. We only have the package where you can take half a day. You can take a full day or half a day.
Boy, I bet that you and Alejandro and everybody else organizing this, when it's all done and over, you'll be so worn out and so happy it's done. Yeah, I wish we could take a few days off, but unfortunately we can because then we got the deadline for the next issue of the magazine, so which we should be working all through next week, but we cannot do it next week because we have the Congress. So then we have basically like 10 days, and we just have to finish all our feature stories and all that. Usually, the editors here, we each write 2 feature stories, plus shorter things too, like the news section or reviews or, I usually do the researcher profile, which is highlighting some important person in the history of ufology, and Alejandro usually does the investigator of the month. So we have like a live one and someone who passed away but had an importance in the field, like Heineck, or in fact, on the next issue, I believe I have Coral and Jim Lorenzen, from the old Apple. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it was reading their books, and they always had stuff in there from South America that
oh, yeah. That was one of the big things. Yeah. That was one of the things. They had an excellent network in South America. Especially in Brazil, he was known as the pioneer of Brazilian ufologists. The late Dr. Fontes, Olavo Fontes.
Yes, I'm trying to remember his name.
Yeah. Yes. And he was a cutting-edge researcher, not just in Brazil, but worldwide. He was really kind of way ahead of his time. I mean, he had excellent connections with the military. He was a medical doctor, so he knew about scientific procedures. He was a man that operated very well, on the high society of Brazil back in those days. And, he had tremendous access to fantastic cases. Cases that later became classics, like the Trinidad Island photographs or the Villas Boas abduction and so on. They were all investigated by him. And he was the representative. And then after he passed away, then there was this other lady, Irene Granchi, who I wrote the obituary in our website. She was a fantastic lady, and she just passed away. But for many years, she also was the representative of APRO and CUFOS as well. She knew Hynek. Yeah, tremendous ufology in Brazil. And of course, we do have Jevaert coming from Brazil. So,
well, I have a quick question here from our virtual auditorium. This one's from Eternal Being, and he asks, have you ever come across any human activity, technologically or otherwise, that could only be explained by the interaction of alien interference?
Human activity that could be explained by the interaction with alien beings. Is that the question, I guess?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah. That's a good question, but I would have to think of it for a few minutes. I mean, I guess it would depend how you interpret something, right? In some cases, unless it's something that was very obvious, but I cannot think of something very obvious. There are, of course, allegations, that it's in Colonel Corso's story, and we did publish in Open Minds, of course, the original diaries of Corso, the original manuscript of his book on Roswell, and he claims, it's not proven, but that's what he says, that a lot of the technology that we see today, like night vision cameras and things like that, came from the artifacts that were retrieved at the Roswell case. So, but that is controversial because how do you prove it, right? It's very hard to prove. Mm-hmm. But his testimony still should be worth something because, I mean, we cannot prove any of Corso's allegations, but at least as opposed to other alleged, whistleblowers and all that, at least what is not in dispute in the case of Corso is his credentials. I mean, he's not just some Colonel X, that claims that he was a colonel and he was here or there. In the case of Corso, yes, we do have his military background, and he was who he said he was. He was in Army intelligence. He had been in World War II. He was the head of Allied intelligence in Rome right after the occupation. Right after the World War II. And then he, at one time, during Eisenhower administration, he was in the National Security Council. So he has quite an interesting military background. So that ought to give at least some credence to his allegations. But those, they're impossible to prove unless eventually this stuff comes out.
You guys, you and Alejandro and everybody else have been so busy organizing this conference and meeting deadlines and whatnot for the magazine. Do you and Alejandro get any opportunity to go out and do any field work or investigations on cases?
Not as much as we would wish, and partly because, like you say, we're very busy. We have a very small staff. If this company grows eventually, hopefully it will. I mean, the magazine is doing well. The Congress, it looks like it's going to be a big success. If we had a larger staff, and then we could maybe devote resources to go to places. But right now, just because we have to keep meeting all these deadlines, so it's not something we have had a chance to do too much. I mean, we have done it, both him and Alejandro and I, but in the past, but when we were on our own, or he was with MUFON. But we're hoping. Usually what happens, too, is if you go somewhere, for instance, when I did it last year, I went to the Congress in Mexico City. So if you go someplace, you're already there, and something's happening, then you try to do something. But we will. I expect that we will in the future. Yes, as we have a little bit more time and resources. It just takes time, to go to places, and it's not just the resources, it's time. You have to travel there, but I'm sure we will be doing it. But yeah, we wish we would do it more. It's always, there's no replacement, I mean, you got the internet and all these things are, they're all very good and fascinating and everything, but there's no substitution to be on the place, right?
This is true.
And to meet a witness, I mean, you can meet a witness, you can talk to a witness, you can interview them on the phone or exchange emails and all that, but you still get a different feel when you see him face to face.
I agree on that. I really do.
Which is the same thing with the congresses, I mean, people can see tapes on YouTube of a lot of these speakers and all that, or they can see them in documentaries or TV shows, but it's not the same that meeting them face to face.
Oh, exactly.
And then you get to interact with them, and you get to ask your questions or whatever, just talk to them.
Gosh, some of the best conversations that I've had at conferences were either, in the hotel restaurant or
correct
down in the hotel bar.
Yeah, usually the most interesting part in conferences is not even the lectures. The lectures you can always buy the DVD later or whatever, but the interaction and the private conversations that you have with people. Yeah, I've always found that, the behind the scenes thing. I always found that was more interesting. These days, it's easy. Everything is recorded, so if you miss the lecture, you just buy the DVD, which of course we will be selling. We'll be happy to sell you one. I'm probably gonna miss most of the lectures too, because we have to be on the table, on the open minds table, helping people with questions or selling books or whatever we're doing. So, although we have shifts, so I'm sure I'll watch some. But and then of course we will have all the DVDs. So anything I missed, I can always watch it later. But the personal interaction, that's different. You have to be there then at that moment.
Well, we have a quick question here from Taldorf in our virtual auditorium, and he would like to know, what is the scariest or most concerned moment that you have had during an investigation?
Scariest moment that I've had during an investigation. I can't think of it right now either. I mean, which means that maybe I didn't have a very scary moment. I'm sure I must have had something, but maybe it'll come to my head here. I'm trying to think, but right now I can't think of it.
Okay, how about I reverse that? What was the most exciting moment for you during an investigation?
Well, probably, I don't know the most, but certainly one of the more exciting, because that's the one time I got to see a UFO, and I had been in the UFO field at that time for probably over about 10 years, but I had never had an experience. And so I was visiting Chile. At the time, my parents were still alive in the 80s, and I used to go a lot to Chile. And I had hooked up with a guy who was some kind of contactee or something, and we went to this area outside of Santiago in the mountains, in the Andes Mountains, place called Cajón del Maipo Canyon. And the guy was giving his whole shtick, I mean, his kind of pseudo-religious philosophy about aliens and all that, and I was not too impressed, I mean, I was kind of very new age or whatever. I just didn't take it too seriously. I mean, I was open-minded, but I wasn't particularly impressed. But then he said, well, now I'm going to take you to a place where you get to see these spaceships or whatever. And I was not alone, by the way. We're a bunch of people, and we had binoculars and everything. And so we go, this would have been early hours of the night, maybe around 9 p.m., 10 p.m. It was early night, but it was dark already. And sure enough, these things appeared. And now I cannot say that I saw a spaceship because they were very high in the sky. So they looked like a star. I mean, it had the same luminosity of a star and the same shape, basically a point of light in the sky, right? But certainly it did not behave like a star. These things were like going in zigzag and making like amazing turns and then stopping in midair. And this went on for, I don't know, good 10 minutes or something. And I got to see them with binoculars, and like I said, there were other witnesses. So I don't know about the contactees' philosophy. I mean, I wasn't too impressed with that, but certainly I cannot dispute, what I saw. So that was quite exciting. I did see a couple of other things later, but this was more exciting because of the maneuvers that these objects were taking. There was nothing that I could, and even though I was a science journalist years, I used to cover NASA missions and all these kinds of things. So I'm generally familiar with aircraft and astronomical phenomena, whatever, because I used to write about all these things. And there was nothing I could identify, not even close. I mean, how would you explain a light in the sky that is just this crazy turns and then stops and then it goes in zigzag and moves around? And so that was definitely one of the most exciting. And it was kind of a late confirmation, even though I was pretty much convinced by the evidence I had accumulated up to that point, But there's no substitute seeing something yourself, right? So that was my first sighting. I saw another thing in near Roswell, actually near White Sands, many years ago in '91. But that, even though it was strange, my gut feeling, is that was a military thing. Was not really alien. It could have been some just kind of military device that is secret or whatever, so I couldn't identify it. But that was just my gut feeling throughout that sighting. Yeah, this is interesting. I even took a photograph of it, although the photograph just shows a little dart of light. That's it. You cannot do much with that photo. It's not like the Cote Lake photo. But the ones in Chile, on the other hand, there's no way that the military would have anything like that, or nothing that I can think of, natural or man-made. No way.
You always remember your first sighting with almost exact detail. I feel the same way about my first sighting. It was impressive, and I have to give kudos to yourself and to other people who are researching this subject that come to understand that this is something real without having seen something themselves.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, there's lots of things that people haven't seen, right? This is something like Stan Friedman talks about it. Like, here you have physicists. They write books about black holes or whatever. But has anybody ever seen a black hole? No. But you can get a PhD thesis about black holes. So sometimes you don't have to see it. I mean, just if you see the evidence, and there's all types of evidence. There's radar reports and footage and landing marks and these cases of physiological effects. I mean, if you just take the time and the trouble to really look at all this stuff, it's enough to convince you. It doesn't have the same probably personal validation, right, that you get when you see something, when you see one of these objects, and that's all I saw. I mean, I didn't. Mine was not a close encounter. This thing was way up in the sky. It was moving very strangely, but it was, I cannot even think what it would be to have a real close encounter. I mean, to see something really close. But that I haven't. But I've seen so much. You had?
No, I haven't seen one up close. I was
right.
going to say that would be really something to see. And where now I have a cell phone with a camera on it, and I'm never without my phone. to be able to...
Yeah, that's how the ufology has changed, too. I mean, that started, I think it was the Mexico wave was the first one, even though at that time people weren't taking it with cell phones, but that's when the camcorders, but the cameras have become cheap and affordable, and now, I remember when I started in this field in the late 70s and then in the 80s, there were a lot of UFO photographs, most of which we have, in the collection of the late Wendell Stevens, which Open Minds acquired, and we're slowly publishing them in the magazine and in the website. So photos you had, because, they were cheap. I mean, photography has been around for 150 years by now, right? And even in the 50s, you had cheap cameras. You had the Kodak Brownies and Instamatics and all that. So photos, there were many. But there were very few motion pictures, because in those days you had to take it with film cameras. And even though some people had 8mm cameras or 16mm, but it was not the kind of equipment you would be carrying with yourself. So film was very rare. Photos were more common. But now it's reverse. Now you almost have more videos than you have photos.
That is a big problem now, because with all of with Photoshop and other video and imaging editing software out there.
There's always a good side and a bad side to things, right? And you're right about that. I mean, at least in the old days, there were hoaxes. Certainly, there were many UFO photo hoaxes, but the photo hoax, you had to do it manually. You had to literally throw some object, a dish or whatever, and then photographed, and it usually would be crude. Yeah, or you could do a double exposure. I mean, there were some tricks that you could do, but that's it. There were no computer tricks that you could do. Whereas now you can do it perfect. If you're computer skilled, you can go and film the skyline of a city, and then you add the flying saucer, and that is also the problem. I mean, YouTube has got a lot of fascinating footage, but how do you know that a lot of those are even real, or what's the story, what's the background, and all that? Yes, and you do have this technology now that unfortunately allows you to do pretty good tricks.
Well,
and people will do them, unfortunately, They do it not necessarily for money or anything, just for, there are different motivations why people do hoaxes.
Just to freak people out sometimes.
Sometimes it's just like a joke or something that gets carried away. Sometimes, occasionally they may be done for money or something, but usually it's not. It's just to fool around, basically. And now, you can just post them on the web, and you can get a lot of attention. It's a problem. So whenever you do have footage now, footage is not enough. You have to have documentation of what was the procedure of that footage, right? How it was acquired, what are the witnesses, and so on.
Oh, goodness. Getting back to the conference, I know we kind of strayed off a little bit, but I love talking about sightings and whatnot. I do. Is there a place where on the website where people can go to find out the names of the documentaries that are going up for the EB Awards?
Yeah, they should be somewhere. Film Festival. Let's see.
I hadn't thought about even looking until just a little bit ago. I'm wondering if any of them are ones that I've
I
already
don't see
seen,
it. I'm looking at. I got the website right here in front of me, and I press the one on the films, but it just gives you the dates basically for the screening and stuff. But let's see. Let me see if in the other program. There they don't list them. Maybe here they do. I got the booklet here.
Oh gosh, and then all the activities that are going to be going on with the banquet on, I believe that's Saturday night, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and that's when they give the award for the films. But that time, all the films have been screened, and so by that time, that's when the awards are given for the films. and there will be some other awards that we're giving this year too. But I have to keep that secret for now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, there will be some other awards too, to researchers and stuff like that. But obviously, if I reveal the names now, then it's anticlimactic, you know. So you have to be there. But all that happens at the closing banquet and EB award ceremony. So that would be on Saturday at 7:30.
I'm planning on being there too. I'm so excited about this coming conference. It's really going to be great. We have about 5 minutes left. If there's something that you'd like to say to our listeners, and where everybody can go for the different information.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope as many as your listeners, especially those who are local. I mean, well, the ones that are out of town too. But I mean, they're running out of time, I guess, to make the airplane reservations and all those things. Depends where you live. Maybe you live within driving distance or something. But certainly, if you're local in the Phoenix area, metropolitan area, yeah, by all means, do check it out. And even the area about the vendors, and there's going to be like an exhibit area, that's free. You don't even have to be registered for that. So the you can still walk around the vendors area and all that. That anybody can just walk.
You would be surprised at how many of the speakers will have a table.
Oh, sure.
Most speakers
have a table. Yeah, usually when you're a speaker, you get a table. Now, there may be some that don't need it. They don't have anything like to sell at this point or whatever. I'm a speaker, but I'm going to be just in the general open minds table, so I don't have my own table. But yeah, Friedman and Jim Mars and even Paul Helger, the Minister of Defense of Canada, and he rarely lectures on these things. But the reason he did agree is because he just recently published his memoirs called Light at the End of the Tunnel. So he will be there and will be selling his book, as well as many of these other people. So so even if you don't go to the conference themselves, you can still check it out and chat with the speakers on the tables and see what's there. And, that's still good. Also good for the vendors, right? That way the vendors may get some business, even with people that I'm not even paying for the conference, but they can still check the tables.
Oh,
so I think it would be a very exciting place, and if you live here, by all means, at least check it out for one day. I mean, you got 5 days to choose from, so between Wednesday and Sunday. So I hope a lot of the locals go and check it out. I think it's going to be, well, this Congress has been going on, for 20 years. But this is the first one that we are sponsoring. It used to be done by the Brown family, but now we own it. Now it's an open minds operation. So it's a little, I think we turn up the standards. The standards are better, and we have better quality speakers and all that.
Yeah, I have a quick question here that my husband just posted, and I think it's a pretty good one. He was asking, depending on how this year event goes, seeing as Phoenix is the 6th largest city in the U.S., will you guys possibly consider a price discount on admission for local residents next year?
It's a good question. I don't know. It would have to be discussed, by all of us. It's something that I couldn't decide myself. I would have to a discount for locals. I'll bring it up. I think it will depend how we do. I mean, already I think we're going to do great because we already have over 600 people. Like I said, we're all prepaid already. I mean,
600?
Yeah, we have over 600 paid people already, and we're still like half a week away. I mean, there's many. So that doesn't count probably a lot of locals that may be going for one day or something like that, or procrastinators, like people who register in the last minute and stuff like that. And that doesn't count. That doesn't count the vendors and the speakers and the spouses and all this kind of volunteers and all that. So that's probably not.
That and the people that will be paying for it when they get there.
Right. Correct. Yeah. These are people that pre-registered. And that these are the sort of the hardcore, you know, the people that have been coming to the Congress for years, and they you know, they're going to be attending for most of the events. But we're still hoping to get a lot of locals who would just go check it out.
Okay, and if you would like to give the website address again?
Yeah, the website is very easy. It's basically UFOcongress.com.
And that's all the time.
After the HTTP and all the 2 slashes, not even the 3 W's, just UFOcongress.com. And for Open Minds, it's openminds.tv.
And unfortunately, we have run all out of time, Antonio. I appreciate you joining us tonight.
My pleasure, Dee. Anytime you want.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for tonight. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in, and also thank all those who joined us in the Pal Talk Auditorium. Stay tuned for Voice of the People, hosted by November Hansen. Her guests tonight are Paul Tate and Andrew Barnes. Please join us again next week for another episode of Eye to the Sky, the UFO Synopsis. Until then, keep an eye to the sky. Good night, everyone.
Montag, lieben, Glauben, Globen.